nós vamos ter a apresentação da Jen Ryback sobre desenvolvimento vertical. Ela vai falar em inglês e peço àqueles que quiserem assistir em português que naquele globo, na parte de baixo da tela, procurem a língua que quiserem assistir. A ICF, que promove a International Coaching Week, é a maior organização de coaches do Brasil. Desculpa, do mundo. Eu escrevi aqui o português e acabei me enrolando. Nós temos 50 mil coaches e estamos presentes em mais de 160 países. A ICW é a maior coleção de eventos ligados ao coaching. Nós temos possivelmente em torno de 1000 eventos em mais de 20 línguas, e nós sugerimos que todos vocês, por favor, procurem no site da ICW 2023/eventos, aqueles que talvez sejam interessantes para você. Nós temos eventos de todas as naturezas, desde algumas sessões de coaching até ideias inovadoras como a que a Jen vai nos apresentar. Nós vamos passar um filme rápido sobre a ICW e depois eu trago a vocês a Jen. Bom, não gostaria de tomar muito tempo, porque nós temos uma apresentação bastante rica para acontecer. E eu vou, então, falar da Jen em inglês, que é a descrição que eu tenho da bio dela. Jen Ryback is a partner with the Vertical Mindset Indicator, where she heads up the programs for practitioners. She is a student of Susan Cook-Grother, education doctor, having been trained to score and coach with a mature adult profile. She is an MCC coach who presently focuses on mentoring other coaches and building communities of coaches interested in integrating the vertical leadership development with other approaches and adapting it to the realities of the workplace while maintaining the depth and integrity of the framework. Well, Jen, thank you very much for being here with us. It's a pleasure. I have been your student. I would highly recommend to all here to take a look at the idea of getting some knowledge of vertical leadership development, possibly taking a course. So I think you will speak to that better than me.
We will see, Flavio. We will see. Great. So, am I taking the mic now?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. It's just great to be here, and I wish I could be speaking to you in Portuguese, but I'm trust we're going to have some fabulous interpreting going on. And please know this next 55 minutes is going to probably be an overview, and you're going to want more. So I'm very happy to be available to you. My email, I'm going to give you my email contact information. Please reach out to me after this if you want more information. If you want, I have some white papers I want to make available to you. And so this is just a doorway that we're opening wide. And with that note, what I'd like you to do is throw into the chat a number between 1 and 5 that indicates your familiarity with this concept of vertical development, or otherwise known as adult stage development. So if you are familiar with this material, if you're very, very, very familiar, give it a 5. If you've never heard the concept and you no idea what it means, give it a 1. So give me a range between 1 and 5 in the chat. Just throw the number in, so I have an idea of who's here. And okay, good, great. Awesome.
Jen, we have most ones,
Mostly
a
1.
few 2, scattered 3s, but I would say that the level of experience or exposure
2.
is somewhat low, between 1 and 2.
All right, goody. We get to start fresh. I love that. All right, so I will just start by saying vertical development, otherwise known as adult stage development, is a concept. It's a framework that has been around for a long time. It's been around for about 40 or 50 years, mostly in academia, and building off the work of Jean Piaget in child development. And I'm going to go into a little bit more about where it comes from and why it matters. What I can tell you about vertical development and the course that Flavio is talking about, and by the way, Flavio, I am now remembering some of the things that you said and asked in that course, and I just want to thank you for that, because I think they were good comments. The course he's talking about is a course that I did through the Institute of Coaching. And if you're not familiar with the Institute of Coaching, that's affiliated with Harvard here in Boston, where I am. It's a fabulous organization to be connected with lots of different resources available. And we did a 6-session deep dive on vertical development. And I'm happy to give you other ways to learn more about it when we're done. So I am going to share my screen and pull up my PowerPoint. And do this. All right, we're going to talk about vertical leadership development, how to use it as a map for building capacity. And we'll see what we mean by that. So before we get into this, what I'd like you to do is sit back and notice, just take a read on the mindset or perhaps sense making that you are bringing to this experience right now. So see if you can pick up on some way of seeing things that's operating underneath your experience. Perhaps what you're feeling, hopes, fears, assumptions, expectations, previous experiences, judgments, what you might be thinking right now. Might be something about me, it might be something about the course, the material, it might be something that happened right beforehand. You might tune into your posture and what you're experiencing physically and see if that has some information for you about your frame of mind or the mindset that you're bringing to this session. How many different elements of mindset can you discern, identify? Perhaps you're feeling a certain way. Perhaps you're, feeling like you just want it to go a little faster. There's a mindset there. You might consider which of those mindsets are automatic, habitual, perhaps barely conscious, and which are more mindful and deliberate, intended. This is what we mean by mindset, what we're going to be talking about today. And that's what the vertical development deals with. It's the way we make sense of ourselves, others, our experiences. And that in turn both limits and defines us and what's possible. Other words that have been used for this idea of mindsets, and you might have heard these if you're familiar with vertical development: action logics, sense making, orders of mind, or mindset. So there are other words that are out there, all speaking to the same thing. Our life, all our life, so far as it has definite form, is a mass of habits, practical, emotional, and intellectual. Some William James, and anyone who studied psychology knows that William James is who we have to thank for modern psychology. So everything we do, we think, we feel, is made of habits. And what we're doing as we grow vertically, or we grow our capacity, is we're waking up to what are habits. We're waking up so that the habits don't own us. We become less subjected to them and hold them more objectively so we can be more mindful and appropriate, or perhaps skillful in what we do and how we are. That's the basis of all of this. Another way to think about it is, how do we move from being asleep to being awake? Automatic pilot to intentional. That's what we're doing with this work. Vertical development is how we go from being subjected to habits of thoughts, emotion, assumption, and action to be able to be in our experience more intentionally, mindfully, and to more skillfully respond to what is. It's a process of waking up to how our habits of mind both define and limit us. So take a moment and consider, why is this important? How might this be important with your clients, with your coaching work, with your life? Make a few notes for yourself. And where this work comes from, vertical leadership development, where it comes from theories of adult stage development, ego construct development, constructivist development, ego psychology, and as I mentioned earlier, the work of Piaget. So some of the names that are out there in terms of its history: Jane Loevinger, Fisher, Kohlberg, and many others in the middle part of the last century. They built on Piaget's studies of child development. And Piaget's, if you're not familiar, did a lot of experiments with kids and found that kids develop along with their brains, how their brain wiring grows and develops, in terms of they grow in the way that they are able to take in information and act on that information. And they go from very simple to being able to handle more complex ideas, concepts, things. I certainly see it with my 14-month-old grandson. You know, every time he wakes up from a nap, he's put another thing together with something else. The difference is with kids, their brain grows along with the biology that's happening, the physical structures that are going in their brain. It used to be thought that adults stopped growing when they hit, adulthood, when they hit like 20 or whatever, our mind stopped growing. What we have found is that our minds actually continue to grow in terms of its ability to put together complex thoughts and concepts and react to those and respond to those. The difference is it doesn't correspond to biology in the same way. The difference is that we have to choose to grow in terms of complexity of how we put things together. We need to choose to say, oh, that's a really hard situation and it's really stressing me out. We choose to say, to either let that take us down or to say, yes, and I wonder how I might learn from this experience and turn it into something else. And Robert Keegan, who you probably are familiar with, if you're familiar with his work, because he's probably the most illustrative of folks in this field. Bill Torbett, Suzanne Cook-Greuter, Jennifer Garvey-Berger, among others, have done further research to identify a specific pattern of growth in adulthood. And that pattern is around stages that we move through. And we're going to go into a little bit more around that. So, vertical development, common thread amongst all the theorists that you might know about. Bob Keegan, Bill Torbett, Suzanne Cook-Greuter, Jennifer Garvey-Berger, Terry O'Fallon. There's some others out there now who are writing more about it. They're all talking about the same thing. So I'm just going to say that up front because it can be really confusing in this field because it looks like everyone's coming up with a different model, a different framework. They're all talking about the same thing, the same concepts. They do it in different ways because everyone has their own way of talking about it. I don't think one is actually better than the other. And the common thread amongst all of these theorists is a predictable pattern of development that involves moving through stages of increased capacity to see, understand, empathize, and respond in more diverse and adaptive ways. Increased capacity, so this isn't knowledge, we're going to get into that in a second, to see, understand, empathize, and respond in more diverse and adaptive ways. And we're not going to go into this in depth, but this just gives you an idea of some of the different frameworks out there. The VMI, which is the tool that I work with and am a partner with. Suzanne Cook-Greuter has the MAP, the Matured Adult Profile. Bill Torbett and Elaine Herdman has the Global Leader Profile. Bob Keegan has and Jennifer Garvey-Berger has a subject-object interview. These are the 4 main ones that are out there right now. And as you can see, we have different names for all the stages, and it was the same in Boston, wicked confusing. Actually, we use the same ones as Bill Torbett. Bob Keegan organizes them a little bit differently and has different names. But once again, the same concept. It's a pattern of stages that we move through. Why does this matter now? I have to say, this is the one. I've been in leadership development work for 30 years. This is the topic that folks are asking for the most now, particularly organizations. Why? Well, I think it's fair to say that, and I would imagine those of you, many of you are nodding your heads at this, is that we have reached the limits of smarts. It's no longer a matter how smart you are, or even how good you are at what you do. All the research that we've got on emotional intelligence, agility, resilience, adaptive leadership point to the need to build capacity as well as skills. So we're talking about a difference between capacity and skills. And just in case you need a little bit more intel, some more information that you want to use to throw into a proposal, you'll have these slides. You can grab some of this and put it in a proposal. I find this is really interesting data. I don't know if you know this, but of the 200 million spent annually on training and development, only about 10% leads to actual performance outcomes. Certain competencies like leading change, inspiring commitment, managing performance, bringing a team together, creating a compelling vision, resilience, seeing a broader context, those competencies, those skills, as measured in a 360, actually increase when you increase mindset or capacity. We'll talk about the difference between capacity and competency in a second. And this is a study that was done by Kunart and Harris, and Torbert found similar results. Barbara Fredrickson's work on Broaden and Build, you probably know her work in positive psychology, and of course, Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, all give us empirical understanding that fear can cause us to contract. And when we contract, our perspectives and our actions get smaller. Our biases become bigger. Just as mindsets of safety and curiosity can enable us to expand beyond our comfort zone. So when we have a mindset or a sense of safety and being openly curious, we are more expansive. We're able to look outside our comfort zone because we feel safe. So there's a connection here between safety and feeling comfortable and not burn out. That is connected with being able to consider beyond what we know, beyond our smarts. I don't think it's any coincidence that Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety and this work on vertical development have both become so prominent in the field in the past 10 years. Both of these areas have been around for decades. Amy Edmondson was writing about psychological safety in the 90s. I know because I talked to her at Harvard, and I try to bring her stuff into organizations, and it was really good. Hackman, her mentor, was talking about it too. And this work in vertical development was around. But it wasn't until now that we're starting to hear about it. Now, it's something to consider. Why now are these things so important? And one answer that I hear when I ask that question is complexity. Maybe it's always been complex, but we just know much more about it because there's so much more information out there. Or maybe the speed and prevalence of information is making things more complex, much more uncertainty. The world seems scarier. There's much more we don't know. And lastly, research from McKinsey suggests, and this was a lovely article called Change Leader, Change Thyself, which you can get from the McKinsey Quarterly online, suggests that mindset is one of the most critical factors underlying behavior change. So all of us coaches here, right? Our work has always been about behavior change. We get a client, they walk in, they say, I've been told I need to change my behavior. We measure how much do our clients be, how much does their behavior change? Well, guess what? The bigger part of the iceberg under the water is mindset. Someone can change their behavior, but unless their mindset changes, they're likely going to revert back to what's familiar. So we talk about this mindset as capacity. Knowledge, skills, competency is like filling the glass. You're making yourself smarter. You have more knowledge. Capacity building is actually making the glass bigger. It's increasing your capacity. So it's not just knowledge, it's your capacity to be in that situation and not to get grabbed up so you can see more. There's more space there. So rather than filling the cup, we're actually making the cup bigger. So there's more available. Another way I like way I like to think about it, I don't know how this is going to translate, but knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, right? Capacity, our wisdom, is knowing not to use it in a fruit salad. All right, so I don't know if that translated, but there's a difference there. Another way we think about it is skill or knowledge is horizontal development. Knowledge, skills, and abilities, you grow them through training and practice. It doesn't necessarily change your perceptions or your experiences or your sense of identity, but you might feel smarter and you might have some skills. Very important stuff. You can learn skills largely. You can learn them from the reading, you can learn training. Vertical or capacity is about complexity of thought, emotion, awareness, systems considerations, and more. So it's more of a mix, an amalgam. It's harder to develop. It requires deliberate and intentional practice to develop capacity. It requires experimenting outside your comfort zone. So you actually stretch. And a mental, emotional, and relational physical shifts. So you might think of something like driving a car. You might think driving a car is a skill. But if you try to learn how to drive a car by reading a book, you probably wouldn't be a very good driver. And if you remember learning to drive, or perhaps you have a kid at home that you're teaching to drive, you notice that initially they have to understand how the car works and get comfortable with how the car works. And they're probably not able to focus on the road very well because they're trying to figure out where is everything and what do I push and what do I pull and what do I click on. And it isn't until they get that muscle memory that they actually have attention available to notice the road. And they build competence and confidence so they can begin to watch what's going on around them. But you don't want them listening to the radio yet, and you certainly don't want them talking on their phone, because they have to put everything into what they're doing. And then eventually, after they get comfortable reading the road and how to handle a car, they might be able to have a real conversation while they're driving. But they only get that by doing this and building up the neural pathways that make it more habit. And then there's more available to pay attention. That's what we're doing with vertical development. It's building your skills so that they're second nature, and your awareness so that it's a knowing if, when, and how to apply those skills. Okay, so that's what we're talking about vertical development as capacity development, mindset capacity. Before we go on, I just want to see if we have any quick questions about this, because I know I'm going a little slow, but I just want to make sure you're getting it.
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
Jen.
Okay.
There was just a question that is that if ICF would be sharing the recordings. Yes, we will.
And if we don't get to talk about the different stages today, I've got a white paper that walks you through them, and I'm absolutely happy to talk to people. So we just wouldn't have a translator if you reach out to talk to me, so we'll have to figure that out. But the couple things to know about vertical development. The first is growing capacity is not easy. It asks us to stretch beyond our familiar spheres of competence, comfort, and knowing. And because we don't know what we don't know, it's beyond our knowing, it helps to have a map. And that's what vertical development frameworks are. They provide a map for understanding and discerning the very specific opportunities for growth based on what we know about these patterns. And some people, you might have learned about vertical development, and you might have learned that these are stages and they go up, and the idea is to get to these later stages. And I'm here to tell you that you are neither happier, wealthier, or sexier at these higher, later stages. What's much more valuable is to think about it as a map and what this says about the mindset that you might be operating and what mindsets you might want to evolve into based on what's being asked of you. And we're going to get into that further. I'm just going to keep going here. So on that note, there's 6 principles to vertical development. No skipping. You need to do the work of one stage in order to build capacity to step into the other. And you can also stretch into a later mindset and lean back to an earlier mindset. So you can inhabit a mindset, and you can also stretch into a later one and fall back. We're going to go into these in more detail in just a second. No stage is inherently good or bad. So we have these stages, but none are inherently good or bad. Growth through these stages is a whole person process. It's not just your head. You can't think yourself into another stage. You have to have an experience. As I said, skill and capacity development are actually interrelated. Horizontal and vertical development, even though we talk about them as separate, they're actually interconnected. And there is no prize at the end, except for maybe death, right? I mean, it's not a race to the top. How do you use this as a map, not a measure? So let's go into a little bit of detail around this. So transformation, and that's what we're really talking about here. This is about transformation. Comes with experiencing, integrating, and embodying the mindset of a stage. So you have to live into it, have an experience, and allow that experience to grow you. Okay? It allows us to both hold and consider beyond that mindset to what's at the edge of the next. This also means that we have access to the mindsets, the earlier mindset that we may have moved through. So you don't lose an earlier mindset. You still have access to it. So technically you can't skip a stage. You have to grow through one to get to the next. And at the same time, you can stretch forward and experiment with a later mindset. That's called a state, experimenting with a later mindset. Or you can lean or fall back to an earlier state if you're stressed or if your situation requires you to do that. Both stretching into a later mindset and leaning back to an earlier mindset take effort and a willingness to do that. So I know plenty of leaders who usually are very comfortable operating from a very late stage, late as in higher or more advanced, complex state. And they are not doing very well as leaders. And that's because nobody knows what they're talking about. They talk in these big terms and, up on the balcony and very strategic and kind of spiritual sometimes, and that people can't relate to it. They need to make the effort to connect what they think and see and experience so others can hear it. That takes effort, to lean back and willingness. So we can stretch forward and lean back. No stage is inherently good or bad. When you read about the mindset stages, you will see, oh God, I don't want to ever be here. This one sounds awful. Or this one, this is where this one seems ideal. The truth is, mindset best is about fit, particularly achiever mindset, redefining mindset, transforming mindset. What does the situation ask of you? And what does that mean for potential for growth for you? Where you might want to dig in and do some growing? And what makes that worth doing? Growth through these mindsets is a whole person experience. It involves experience, reflection, integration, embodiment, just like driving. So it becomes automatic. And horizontal and vertical development are interdependent. And what I mean by that is, even though we talk about horizontal and vertical being separate, if you work on a skill, say a skill like running a meeting, that's a skill that many of us coaches are asked to help our clients with. And we know, you write an agenda, you come in, you make space for people to ask questions. There's certain skills that this takes. If you do that mindfully and deliberately, paying attention to what it takes for you to do that, paying attention to how other people are relating to you, noticing the feel of the room, you will grow vertically because you're increasing your awareness. You're taking the focus off of you and onto the situation. You are increasing capacity. And vice versa. As you become more aware of the environment and what's needed by other people and what you're trying to achieve together, you will become more skillful in how you use those skills. So they're actually kind of interdependent. We talk about them separately just because it's easier pedagogically to do that. But the reason I'm saying that is because even if you don't know much about the vertical framework, if you're coaching somebody and they're working on a skill, say like listening, how to become a better listener, and you say, let's work on listening to learn as opposed to learning to fix or solve or win. How do you know when you're trying to listen to fix or solve? What happens inside? And now let's listen to learn. And what does it take for you to listen to learn? What happens? What do you notice inside your body? How do you sit? What might you tell yourself? What might you have to let go of in order to do that? Bringing those questions in is actually inviting vertical growth, because you're inviting them to expand their capacity, not just the skill, to pay attention differently. And as I said, there is no prize at the end. So when you read about these stages, don't worry if you don't feel like you're alchemical or transforming. Very few people make it to these later stages. And even if they do, that doesn't mean they're happier, wealthier, or better leaders. It's best to use this as a map to help you get as specific as possible about what's the development edge, the development opportunity that's being asked of you or your client. So these are the stages. I'm just going to check right now to see if we have any questions or thoughts before I go a little further.
Not so far. I think people are eager to hear from the stages and how you describe them.
Yes. Now this is going to be quick, much quicker than you want. But like I said, you'll get more information. So we like to think of these stages like the rings of a tree. So the later stages are the ones on the outside, include the earlier ones. So you don't lose access to the earlier mindsets. They're there. It just may not be how you prefer to function or operate. The opportunist mindset is one that we rarely, if ever, find people operating from in the business world. There might be folks who visit it as a state when things are really, really hard. It's not one I've ever assessed anybody at when I've done assessments. The opportunist mindset is one in which you have to win no matter what. And you make sure of it by beating everybody else out. It's a mindset that often leads to much manipulation and damage around you. You might say, what's the good in that? Well, the good in that is the opportunist mindset is really good at seeing threat because they're on red alert. They're always looking for threat. The problem with the opportunist mindset is they see threat everywhere, even if it isn't there. So that's why they have to protect themselves all the time. However, if you're really, really under existential life or death threat, many of us will go to an opportunist state because we have to protect ourselves no matter what. The next mindset. So what might happen is opportunist mindset folks will not show up for coaching. They won't show up for therapy. They won't show up for help because they're terrified to know that they're human and vulnerable. However, they might end up in counseling because they probably are hurting people around them. And some of them might start realizing that, well, if I really want to be safe, there's safety in numbers. I need to be part of a group. The diplomat mindset is one that is all about belonging. I need to fit in. It's not safe. The mythology here is it is not safe outside of the group. So I'm going to make sure I follow the rules. I'm going to make sure I do everything the way it's always been done. I'm going to dress like my colleagues. I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to rock the boat. The diplomat mindset is one that works really well in some organizations where things have to be done the way they've always been done. Think highly bureaucratic organizations. The upside of the diplomat mindset is intense loyalty, and you know what you're going to get. The downside of the diplomat mindset is that you don't get a sense of individuality. People can feel squashed. You don't grow in that environment. High degree of safety, high degree of boredom. You don't want a diplomat mindset if you need to have a highly innovative culture. The diplomat mindset, what happens with the diplomat mindset is someone might say to you, either internally you might feel it, or someone might tap it in you. There's a desire to build a skill, to individuate, to make a name for yourself, to learn something. You just want to kind of break away. And that's where we step into the expert mindset. Or perhaps your group needs somebody who's really good at what you are really good at, and you go and you get more education and you bring it back. The expert mindset tends to be very focused on what you know and what you do. And because of that, it tends to lead to a focus on details, on logistics, on standards, on metrics, because that's how we can gauge how we're doing. So expert mindset loves standards, loves procedure, loves spreadsheets, loves credentials. And one example is I do a lot of work in the medical world. When I work with doctors who are also executives. I make sure it says that I won an award for teaching at an Ivy League school one semester. For me, I sometimes forget about it because I'm not an academic, and it was a fun experience, but it wasn't what I was going to do long term. To them, it means something, because to come up in the medical world, you need to hit those marks. And so they would recognize it as it would give me some credibility with them. You see the expert mindset a lot in highly technical environments like engineering, medicine, accounting. The good part is we get the details covered and we know what's what. The bad part of it is we get so focused on being right, having the right answers, that sometimes we privilege being right over being effective. So what might happen with the expert mindset is someone's going to come up to you and say, you are really good at what you know and what you do. You should be leading the team. So you start leading the team and you tell everyone what they need to do because you're really good at it. And you're meeting with your coach, and your coach says, how's it going? And you say, well, it would be going great if they didn't give me these idiots to work with. I tell them what to do. I show them how to do it because I know how to do it right. And they don't do it the way I would do it. So I end up having to do it for them. Now, that's not a good way that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. So your coach might say to you, would you rather be right or would you rather be effective? To which you might say, oh, well, I know I'm right, but that's clearly not being very effective. So I need to look at what it means to be effective. And that's moving us into the achiever mindset. The achiever mindset is about being effective. It's about achieving results. It's about driving to outcomes and goals. And that happens through, and I know all of you coaches know this, that happens through emotional and social intelligence. That happens through how we communicate. That happens through beginning to check in with others and seeing what is it they need in order to come along and get the job done. So we get really good at clarifying goals, at building a team. We get really good at holding people accountable. We get good at having conversations for results and expectations. We might even get good at setting boundaries to get work done. The achiever mindset is very high energy, high agency. It's an important mindset for most of our organizations because you need to deliver results. And folks tend to feel really good in this mindset because there's a great sense of competence that I know how to get things done and I am rewarded for getting things done. And what happens with the achiever mindset is we get really good at getting things done, achieving our goals. We become known for that. And people start reaching out to us to do more. And we have a hard time saying no. Why? Because we don't want to give up this identity of I'm the person who gets things done, or I'm being rewarded for it, or I just got this big promotion because I got all this stuff done. What's going to happen if I don't keep that up? So often what happens at the other side of achiever, when we've done this work of achiever, gotten really good at bringing people along and achieving results and all that, is we find ourselves burnt out, overwhelmed with too much on our plate and wondering, is this what I really want? The question that I often find myself asking clients who are at the edge between achiever and redefining is, what matters more to you, achievement or fulfillment? And I can't tell you how many times that question will jerk a tear or two from somebody. They'll sit back and they'll say, oh my God, yeah, you're so right. I've been doing all of this and I'm really good at it and I'm really afraid to let it go. but it's not doing it for me in the same way as it used to. And I have no idea what will. Sometimes for folks stepping into redefining, it'll happen because they're having a major life situation, a bad diagnosis of a loved one, having kids leaving home, a big new job, a relationship falls apart. Moving from achiever into redefining is when we start to question all the ways that we've come to identify based on the group, based on what we know and what we do, based on what we achieve. We start to question all of that and wonder, well, what is it that really matters to me? And we start going inside and unpacking who we are. Bob Keegan talks about this as self-authoring. We're authoring ourselves in a new way, redefining. Think of it as when the scaffolding that you use to rest your sense of self on has become rickety and doesn't hold up the same way. So the redefining mindset is the most disruptive mindset to grow through. It asks us to start looking at us and questioning things in a new way. As leaders, our clients might exhibit redefining by being very inclusive to the point where it looks like they can't make a decision, considering lots of different options, innovating to a point where nothing gets done. Some of the work we might need to do with them as coaches is help them set priorities. The other thing that happens with redefining is we become more in touch, more aware of and in touch with our own emotional world and our physical well-being. And that wakes us up to empathy because we're feeling more, we're more aware of how we feel and how others feel. And that moves us into transforming. We're becoming more aware of what's around us. And as we move into the transforming mindset, there's almost like a coming home from the turbulence of the redefining mindset to a settling and an acceptance of who we are, warts and all, shadow and all, coming home, deeper acceptance of ourselves and others so that we're able to be with more in our world without getting spun up. We have more capacity. The downside of that is, it sounds wonderful, but the downside is that we can also come across as kind of detached and arrogant because we're not spun up, and sometimes we kind of see things with this distance and we'll kind of almost sound professorial or like we're not in it with them. So sometimes the work with transforming mindset is, how do I communicate what I see in a way others can really hear it and get it? How do I meet people with compassion and clarity? It's a lot of the work of the transforming mindset. And then as we become more and more familiar with the systems and how things are interconnected in the transforming mindset, we begin to see that the lines between things are actually quite faint, if not there, non-existent. And that moves us into the alchemical mindset, where we see things as much more non-dual, good and bad, all the same. The alchemical mindset is a very hard mindset to be in if you're in corporate organizational life, because you just see past a lot of the lines in order that's expected. Very few people assess out at alchemical. So I'm going to stop there. Because in the interest of time, knowing that I'm leaving you with many, many questions. Anything that's burning right there, Flavia?
Yeah, there are two interesting questions, and
Yep.
I just wanted to tell our friends that I will put your paper in which those stages are detailed in the chat box, a link to the paper. so that people might just download them and share with others. But the first question is, how long does it take to go through each stage on average?
So I'm going to give you the honest truth that comes from research, with the caveat that the last time I said this out loud in a group, a corporate group, I was asked not to come back. And I think that's because they want to know how fast can you grow people, right? The truth is, because this work is experiential and you have to live through it, it takes a bit of time, a couple years. You know, they say with mindfulness practices now, you can accelerate it a little bit. But remember, this is very organic. You can't force it. It's almost like sometimes a bud on a tree. You have to allow it to grow in you and feel comfortable. But I'd say a couple years of deliberate practice and coaching. Yeah, particularly redefining can be a long one to go through. And do we have another question there?
Yes, the question, this one I'll translate is, does each stage correspond to a behavioral profile, a different behavioral profile, or would that be an evolution line to be persecuted?
I don't quite get it. Behavioral profile as in a personality?
Different behavioral profile. Does each stage correspond to a different behavior profile?
Would we see different behaviors with different mindset stages? Possibly. Yeah. And you'll see when you read the paper, you know, it shows up in different ways that we're being, like, experts will tend not to listen. Expert mindset folks will tend to tell you more and not ask a lot of questions because they know. And they don't want to know that they don't know, so they're not going to ask questions. You know, the achiever mindset will be very active and driving forward and moving things, and they talk very fast, and you see a lot of that. Redefining mindset tends to step back and start asking more questions. Being curious, so you might see some behavior changes, absolutely. And that's a lot of what we do, is identify what is the very specific behavior that you might step into and practice. So I'm just going to make it, I'm not even going to do this here.
There is another
Please.
question. I'm
Yes.
sorry, John. Is there a test to
Yes.
determine the stage we're at?
Yes. Thank you for that, because I'm going to show this slide. There are several tests out there. They are mostly all what we call sentence completion tests, where you complete a sentence. Right now, most of them are in English. I believe that the Global Leader Profile might have it in Portuguese. I'm not sure. But if you can do business in English, you can do these tests in English. So they're all sentence completion tests where you complete these sentences, sentence stems. Most of them are scored manually by someone like myself who is trained to score it. That means they are expensive and they take a long time to do. The VMI, the Vertical Mindset Indicator, is the one that I'm a partner with, and it's the first one that's actually scored using AI, artificial intelligence, and so you can get your results immediately, and it's much more affordable. And I'm actually happy to offer you a free trial of it if you'd like to give it a go and see what it's like. Like I said, it is in English. You just email me, and my information is right here. And I can set you up to give that a go. We also have a licensing program for coaches who want to use it with clients. That's actually a ton of fun, and you get a deeper dive into vertical development through that licensing program. Those are the main tests for this. That said, we strongly encourage you to hold stage lightly, hold the mindset stage that we just went through lightly, and take your growth and your context seriously. It's much more important to consider what does this tell me about my growth opportunities than to use it to judge how far along the scale you are. Because we tend to have a range and operate from a couple different mindsets. And it's more helpful to see what your potential range is and what that means about what works and what I might want to focus on.
Another question.
Yes.
Edilyn would like to hear a little more about the alchemist stage.
Okay. What more can I tell you about the alchemical stage? So the alchemical stage is one where we are very, very comfortable with silence and quiet. It's one in which we don't see lines in the same way. Like, I am part of me, and I am part of you, and you are part of me. I could not exist without you. And we see that interplay much more nuanced. It's how we can be with our shadow side, that part of ourselves that we don't like at earlier mindsets, and accept it, meet it with some compassion and love for how it brings depth to who we are. In leadership, alchemical mindset often leads to being very quiet behind the scenes. They don't need to be out front. They may not even want to be known. They might just navigate some things behind the scenes. So creating the conditions. They might even say, you know what, this company doesn't need to exist anymore. Oof, we're done. Because they can see there's something else beyond. So you can see why they may not be all that welcome at the next board meeting.
Yeah, and okay, I just read somewhere that the alchemists are less than 2% of the adults. Yeah, very, very few are there. So
Yeah,
I think
in the
I'll
work
be.
with them, in coaching them, if they are in an organization, often the work is, if they really want to stay in the organization, how to make that okay. And sometimes the work is really just witnessing, just holding the space and witnessing them, because they often come to their own understanding pretty easily. So I know we're just over time here, and I am leaving you with, probably, I'm going to go to this slide again so you can get this information. Did we put it in the chat?
I just put in the chat the article that you shared with me.
Don't grab my email here. Let me just do this here. Hang on for a second. I'll do this. I'm going to go ahead and just grab all of this. And I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat. So you all have it.
Excellent.
Yes. So I'll let you take all that down. Please do reach out. Deepak does speak Portuguese, so I'd be happy to connect you all with Deepak too if you want to do the VMI or learn about the practitioner. The PLP is the practitioner licensing program. So Deepak right here, you can reach out to him and or me. You've got the article. I have other articles too. And these three are particularly good ones if you want to learn more. The Institute of Coaching is now running. We're in the middle of our second course, vertical development course. We'll probably run it again in the fall. So you can keep your eye outs for that. And like I said, I'm absolutely happy to talk with you if you want more information.
So thank you very much, Jen. It was great, and lots of compliments in the chat. And I am absolutely convinced that people will reach out to you or to the papers and get more information on the subject. We have a form I would ask everyone to fill in. It hasn't been sent yet. Clelia, would you please send the form? I don't have it handy. Folks? Well, I'm afraid she's not here. Anna, do you have the form handy? Just a minute, please. We would very much appreciate if you give us feedback on this presentation, and we'd love to have you in the coming ICW events tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday. Thank you very much. Goodbye.